Sort of funny, you get a note 2 days before an event and says, oh, by the way. Talking about extraordinary people, it's an honor to introduce a friend of District 5100, a Rotarian, and President of ShelterBox, Kerri Murray. Organizations can only grow and thrive under leadership. Over the years, Kerri has guided ShelterBox USA in expanding its fundraising, volunteer corps, and capacity to help more families. These efforts have been recognized with our platinum status with Charity Navigator, 2 nominations for the Nobel Peace Prize, and of course, ShelterBox's project partnership with Rotary International. We're pretty fortunate to have Kerri here today. She recently came back from Poland, working with our efforts in the Ukrainian crisis, and I'm sure she's going to speak about that. So please give a warm welcome to Rotarian and ShelterBox USA President Kerri Murray.
Frank? There we go. Okay, good. Thank you, Eric. That was incredible. Your Rotary story is very moving, and it's always an absolute privilege to be here with District 5100. I felt a connection to this district really from my early time starting with ShelterBox, and one of the first folks that I met was Tom Marcos at Starbucks, and he had a coffee with me, and I just have felt every single time I'm with you just a deep connection to Rotary, to our youth exchange, and I just feel an incredible passion for the global work that we do every day at ShelterBox. And I just want to say just a big thank you to all of the support you've provided to the organization over the years, and specifically over really the past several months with the crisis in Ukraine. So my journey to ShelterBox really started with the birth of my daughter, and I know some of you have met her, but I was a corporate executive years ago, and I was climbing the corporate ladder and pregnant at the time when everything went wrong with my daughter. And she went to her 41st week, and I was supposed to have a healthy 8-pound baby, and she had a major issue where a cord was wrapped around her neck. So she hadn't grown for 10 weeks. She was 3 pounds. And when she came out, she was called the $1 million baby. So by the time she left the NICU, her bills were over $1 million. And initially, when she was born, they said she's never gonna make it. And by the miracle of modern medicine and living in a country that has access to great care, she made it, she survived, and many of you know, because 3 years ago she was at district conference singing the national anthem. She is a singer, it was really interesting as she's about to graduate college now, and she came to district conference with me in 2019, and it was on a flight up here and on the flight return home when we were going to Bend, Oregon, that she wrote a song. And that song she ended up singing on American Idol. And she wrote her college essay about that flight up to District 5100 conference, and she is now about to graduate from high school, and in September she's attending Columbia University. So it's incredible, but the path for her and the path for me to get here was really the realization that in so many parts of our world, people just don't have access to the basic things that we take for granted. It's food, it's water, it's shelter, and it's access to medical care. And it was after having her and see her surviving and thriving that I knew I needed to change my life. And the CEO of the company I was with sent me on a 6-month assignment, and it was to help a medical relief nonprofit. And I was a month into my assignment when that earthquake hit Haiti back in 2010. And I went to Haiti. And the first organization I saw on the ground was ShelterBox. And the first organizations I saw were ShelterBox and Rotary, because those tents were everywhere, and the boxes were everywhere. And my 6 months has turned into the past 12 years of my life, and it was 7 years ago that I joined ShelterBox as its president. And really, it's this very simple premise that the organization represents, which is really about what are the things that you need to really sustain your life if you lose everything in an instant. And whether you realize it or not, this massive displacement in our world today is one of the biggest issues plaguing our world. And so now there are 114 million displaced in our world by disaster and conflict situations. It's more than any time in recorded history, and it's only getting worse. And yes, I just returned recently from working on the border of Ukraine. I was in Poland helping the initial assessment team who was really working to understand how ShelterBox could really be helpful in this crisis. But really, from the time we got started 22 years ago at ShelterBox, the premise has remained the same. It's what are the things that you need to sustain your life, and how can we provide those efficiently and effectively to people in need? And so the center of gravity of what we do today is still the shelter, and it's still a ShelterBox tent, or it's tarpaulins, it's tools, it's the things to provide the basic framework for you to have a place to call home in the aftermath of losing your home to a disaster. And so the basic things we provide, the shelter, the solar lantern, so often in disasters, you're seeing this now in Ukraine, you've lost power, so basic light is critical. Also, you've had contamination of the water source, so basic things like purified water become increasingly important. Also, basic things to sleep on, sleeping mats, mattresses, blankets, tools to help you repair a home that's been damaged so you can temporarily shelter in place. So yes, we still supply shelter boxes, and you've seen one of the ShelterBox tents out there. We have a variety of different tented solutions that we provide, really based on the type of situation that we're going into. We're not deploying tents in this situation in Ukraine. We're actually providing thousands of our shelter kits, and these are basic tarpaulins, these are basic tools and fixins to help repair a home that's been damaged so you can temporarily shelter in place. So we're bringing thousands of these items in. But at the core of what we do at ShelterBox, and it's been the core since the beginning, is Rotary. And Rotary remains in the DNA of every single thing that we do. And I would say this district is really one of the biggest catalysts for our growth at the organization over the past several years. And our fastest growth in terms of the piece of work that we're doing is not in natural disaster situations, it's actually in conflict situations. These protracted crisis situations that are displacing the highest number of people in our world today. So we are working all over the world at any given time. I would say the unfortunate thing about our work is that it's really the headlines that drive the interest in our work. And it's on the worst day ever that people tend to care about this work. And so yes, so right now there's a tremendous amount of interest in our work in Ukraine and in the neighboring countries, but we are also deployed and working all over the world, helping some of the most vulnerable people on our planet. So Ukraine, this has been an unbelievably fast-moving crisis. We've never seen anything like it in terms of the scale, when you just look at the sheer numbers of the people who've been displaced. So on the map that you're looking at in red, those are the areas within eastern and northern Ukraine that have experienced the airstrikes. And this is where you're seeing the highest waves of displacement. You're seeing the most civilian casualties are in these areas. And so this all started on February 24th, and just in the past 3 months, what we've seen is more than a quarter of the population displaced. And that's over 8 million people who remain internally displaced. They're moving from east to west. So that area where you see 2.9, that's 2.9 million people who fled to that area of Lviv. And then you have 6 million people who have fled to neighboring countries. And so many of those countries, places like Poland, receiving lots of refugees, also places like Moldova, we're seeing the most number per capita. And really, this has happened so quickly that really people have had their lives absolutely torn apart. So we knew at ShelterBox that we were going to be responding, but really initially what we do is we conduct assessments. We need to determine who's been infected, where are they going, what are the needs that they have. We weren't just going to send things in. We really needed to work and coordinate on the ground with other local partners underneath the UN. We work within the UN shelter cluster system. I was deployed to Poland with our first team. We started in Krakow, and that was kind of a main area where the organization was taking place of all the other INGOs as well as the UN. We were organizing and working together there. And then I went down to the border of Ukraine to an area called Przemysl, which this is the train station. I'm going to share with you some photos I took. This is the first stop for people fleeing into Poland. This is the first train station stop. And what I saw when I was working there is on average 20,000 people arriving at the train station every single day. And what I witnessed was mostly women, mostly children, elderly, and disabled. And then, as you can see, animals as well, some cats, some dogs, but very few men. And that's because if you're between 18 and 60, you're forced to stay back to fight. And so families had to make these very difficult decisions of fleeing. Many of them left adult children behind. They didn't bring very many things with them, so it was a coat and maybe a small roller bag, and they traveled for days just to get to this spot. So typically it was 5 days if they were in eastern Ukraine, 5 to 7. They were going by foot, by bus, by train, just to arrive to this station. And I'll tell you, there was absolutely no sense of relief for these folks because they left family members behind. I talked to so many people who had to leave their 18 or 19 or 20-year-old son behind, their husbands behind. They didn't know if and when they'd be able to go back to their homes. They weren't working, and so it was just the basic things that they need to survive. And the first question they had was, where am I going to sleep tonight? And so this was a really incredible thing to just observe and be a part of, to really understand, okay, where are people coming? What are the numbers looking like? Where are they actually going, right? And so there are several places that they're going. They're going to evacuation centers, and so when they get to the train station, there are people with maps. There are tons of buses outside, and many of them are moving to evacuation centers, collective centers where they can sleep for a few days or a week. Some of them were moving with families and friends if they had any. Some of them were going to apartments or hotels that were opening up for them to spend a few nights. But they were in absolute fear of what's coming next. There's a picture of me with a woman there. What I saw that I think was the most heartwarming for me was that people coming from across Europe with signs. Many of them said, they would be willing to take 2 people, 2 women, 2 children. People showing up, just offering to serve as what's called host families, taking people in. And this woman I met was offering to take 4 people, and she was going to drive 2 to Germany. She had driven 24 hours just to get to the train station. She met 2 girls she was going to take to Germany, and she met 2 ballet dancers from Ukraine she was going to take to live with her in France until she could get them settled in Paris eventually. So there's an incredible avalanche of an outpouring of goodwill that we see in these situations. And I know that's even true for this district. And I really want to acknowledge the amazing work that you've done. I've heard you've raised in 10 days $150,000 for your sister club in Eastern Poland. And I think it's absolutely extraordinary. Those interventions make such a difference, the things that you're doing. So buying an ambulance, equipping it with medical supplies, making sure it's getting into Ukraine to help people who've been affected, who just need the basic things. So it's wound care at this point, it's food, it's water, it's basic shelter services. So you're meeting some extraordinary needs. And I would just say, I would encourage you to keep it up, because what we see in these situations is once the headlines fade on this, and you already see there's other headlines that are starting to take over, what happens is as people think the situation has gone away and they stop giving. But this is going to be a long, protracted conflict situation. We're anticipating months, if not longer, and that's the reality of this situation. But these private charitable donations that are flooding in to help some of these local groups, especially Rotarian groups, are essential and important. So great work. So what are we doing? We have a series of projects, and we've turned our attention to helping displaced people within Ukraine and then in neighboring countries. But I would say perhaps the most vulnerable people are those that are stuck internally within the country. And they're fleeing east to west. They're going to places like collective centers, they're going to churches, they're going to schools, and they're sleeping on the floors. So what we started initially was our mattress project, which is we're providing thousands of mattresses which go to evacuation centers, which enable people to have. Can you hear me? Yes. So these mattresses are going in, thousands of them, to places in Western Ukraine and places like Lviv. We also have a series of projects that are shelter kit projects, which are helping people in more central and eastern Ukraine who are living in homes that have been damaged by the shelling. So just basic things like tarpaulins and tools to repair these homes. In addition to these kits, we're providing hygiene supplies, so sanitation, basic sanitation, sanitary pads, things like toothpaste, toothbrushes, combs, body wipes, just basic hygiene supplies for these families. Also solar lanterns for areas that have lost power, water containers, high thermal blankets. So these are just very basic supplies, but do help people who are in a time of crisis right now. And this is just our first initial projects that are in Ukraine. We also have a series of projects in Moldova. So I mentioned Moldova. It has the highest percentage of refugees coming in per capita to their population. It's over 20%. It is the poorest country in Europe. And these host families and these collective centers really need help for these families, so we're providing thousands of hygiene supplies, as well as small multi-purpose cash allotments that allow families to buy the basic things that they need. It could be prescriptions, it could be basic food for your family, basic clothing, and basic items for them, so there's small cash allotments for each family. And these are some of the families that we've been helping in Moldova. Many of them are living in collective centers at this time. So we remain absolutely committed to the work in Ukraine. We are not turning our back on this. This is going to be a long, protracted crisis. We have 3 major projects now, and we're already moving into the midterm, what's going to be phase 2 projects. And we have our teams kind of assessing what are going to be the mid and longer term needs of these families. I want to talk briefly about the importance of shelter. Why is it so important, and particularly over the past 2.5 years? And I don't think anyone will debate how important your house has been and your home has been to your safety and well-being during the COVID pandemic. But for so many people, tens of millions of people who are displaced across the world, really, they haven't had a place to protect their family. Many of them in refugee camps or in crowded collective centers. They don't have the ability to get vaccinated, and it's just basic sanitation and hygiene needs that they have. So we've remained committed to doing our shelter projects, but also adapting our work to ensure that we're doing no harm and to make sure that we're protecting families. So we're adding things like soap, hand washing basins to the aid package. We're using basic PPE, so we're equipping everyone with gloves, sanitizers, masks. A lot of our work has been virtual over the past few years. So while we're still responding, there have been areas and countries that we cannot go into the borders. And so we've had to continue to send our items, but work through local Rotary, work through our local humanitarian aid partner, distribution partners to do the work. And there are often times that we're having to do training just like everyone else is doing on Zoom. So if there are places that we can't go in, but we know that we're needed, Sometimes it's even training people over Zoom to ensure that we can reach them. But our work, I would say, over the past 2.5 years has never been as important, and it's for families like Fan. A huge piece of our work at ShelterBox is across the Lake Chad Basin of Africa, and we do a lot of work in the country of Cameroon, and it has a huge wave of displacement, many Nigerian refugees fleeing into the country, and that includes Fan, who was displaced from Nigeria, and it was Boko Haram, the militant group that stormed her village. Her husband was injured in the attack, and like so many women, she was forced to flee with her children, and she went to a camp across the border called the Minowao Refugee Camp. This is a really important piece of our work at ShelterBox. We are the only provider of tents to new arrivals at the camp. And for Fan and her family, when she arrived at the camp, she was held for weeks in a crowded collective centers during the COVID pandemic, no ability to isolate her children. And this was a massive problem, so we remained absolutely committed to doing the work. And what changed for Fan and her family was when she received a plot of land from the government, as well as her ShelterBox tent. And we always say shelter is the first step in the recovery process. Once you have a roof over your head, she could start to think about children going back to school. Fan is now earning a living and has a small job in the camp as well. But on average, these families who move into a refugee camp setting will be there for 17 years. So we've had a long-term commitment to helping refugees in refugee camps, both newly displaced as well as long-term displaced. I think many of you are familiar with the work that we do in terms of how we do it, but I do want to mention it because it's such an extraordinary way that we do the work is through the service of volunteers, and many of you in this district have met Bill Woodard, who will always remain in our hearts. Was an incredible ShelterBox response team member and ambassador and recruited so many of you who now serve. But these folks go through months and years of training. Over the course of a year, it will take both remote trainings, live trainings, so many different assessments. 1 in 30 people pass the program and become a ShelterBox response team member. Bill was a team lead, but we've started to deploy our response team volunteers again. It was a bit difficult during the COVID pandemic, but they're out there again. We've started deploying them in Ukraine. We actually sent some to Moldova, so they are out there, and many of these folks who serve on the front lines of crisis for our organization are actually Rotarians. So Rotary's been a huge, huge source of really finding the best and the brightest in these talented volunteers who serve with our organization, getting things to where they need to go, and as you can see, any way that they can. I mentioned Haiti, and it's how I found the organization. That remains one of our largest responses in our history. But we also have been working extensively in places like Syria. This is the longest response in our history, has been 11 years to the crisis in Syria. It is the reason why in 2018 and in 2019, ShelterBox was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, and it's for our work in the world's most conflict-ridden places, and that includes Syria. I mentioned the camp in Cameroon, and I just want to show you a couple of slides here about how these camps expand. This is the Minowao camp in 2013, and as you see it expand, you'll see a lot of little white dots. All of these white dots are ShelterBox tents within the camp. So it is now swelled to 70,000 people, and that includes people like Esther. And Esther will always remain in my presentations because she is indicative of the people that we work to find in the world. Esther was a teenage girl. She was 14 years old back in 2014 when she had to flee Boko, Nigeria, when the militant group stormed her village. They raped and murdered her mother, they killed her father, and they killed her brothers, and they told her to run. And Esther was meant to be target practice, but Esther and a group of girls made it to the Cameroon border where they were taken by security forces to the camp. She's remained at the camp ever since. And one of the major things that changed her life was receiving a sewing class and taking sewing classes within the camp. And now Esther is one of the finest seamstresses in her block of the camp. She is married, she has 2 children, and she is the primary breadwinner for her family, supporting her family. She is also indicative of what's called the long-term displaced, and this is something that we work on, and we get a lot of support from Rotary to do this, but we help families who've been displaced over the long term with basic things that they need. Could be cooking sets, could be solar lights. In Esther's case, that's tarpaulins to help improve her home within the camp. So we are doing a lot of this work quietly. It doesn't make the headlines. You're not going to read about it in the news, but it's transformational work that is truly life-saving for these families all over the world. And so much of it's possible because of our support from Rotary. I'm going to pull just a couple pictures up from Houston. And is anyone headed to Houston for convention? Okay, great. I pulled this up for a reason. So responding in the US is the exception, not the rule. Because when you look on the Human Development Index, at ShelterBox, we really work at the countries that are lowest on the Human Development Index, the poorest, most vulnerable places on the planet. However, we have been called to help here in the United States in extraordinary circumstances. And I received the call from FEMA back in late 2017 to help in Houston. And where the RI convention is going to be in June is actually this room here. This is the George R. Brown Convention Center that was holding 15,000 people who lost everything. Their trailers washed away. They showed up with garbage bags of everything they owned. 15,000 people sheltering in a spot for 5,000, and people lived here for weeks. And this is where the RI convention will be this year. But what we were doing at this convention center was helping the health department. So we were providing our shelter within a shelter, the biddy tent that you see out there. We were providing those so they could do wound and incontinent care, lactation services, spiritual care. They were doing AA meetings in the tents. So we had a series of tents that enabled basic services to continue during that crisis. And in some places, like American Legion halls and what you see on the right-hand side of that screen, we were providing one per family in smaller settings so people could have a bit of space in congregated settings so they could come together as a family and determine the next steps of their life. So, and these are some of the photos of that response. Our latest response is in Yemen. This is one of the worst humanitarian crisis situations of our time. And this has been a massive displacement of people. And what we're doing in Yemen is helping to improve really basic shelter. And many times what these homes are called, they're called nests, and that people are literally cobbling together whatever they can find, sticks and bags, really the most basic things to help create their homes. So we're providing tents, we're providing tarpaulins and basic tools and NFIs to help improve people's livelihoods in some of the most vulnerable parts of our world today. And Rotary has also been a massive part of our initial pilot program in Yemen, which we are about to scale up. So I'm going to finish, and I'm going to just say a big thank you to all of you, but one of our biggest districts in the world right now is District 5100, and it has been the long-term support, the quiet support, not just during major disasters that break the headlines, but it's been every single year. It's been this district that continues to contribute. And many of you are Hero Award winners. I know we gave the awards out yesterday, but I want to say thank you. Rotary Club of Portland, are you here? Daniil, are you here? I don't see you. Okay, thank you. Over and over again, you've remained a gold tier club each year. Our silver and bronze winners, thank you so much. The only reason we're able to continue to scale and have greater impact in the world is because of our support from Rotarians around the world and individual clubs and districts that continue to give to enable this work. I also want to recognize our incredible ambassadors. Can you please stand up? these are the folks, and a major reason why I do the work that I do. I am so inspired by people who just decide that they want to serve. And it's not a one and done, it's not just a packing day and I'm going to go move on with my life, but it's people who actually live it every single day and who mobilize awareness and mobilize the support to do this work. And I just want to say a big thank you to our ambassadors. You inspire me every day, and we couldn't do this work without you. So you are a massive, massive piece of how we do this. So thank you. There are many opportunities that exist, so I know that the team feels like they're lean and mean, but they're feeling a little lean right now, and they would like to have some support. And I would say, for many of them, they would say that this is some of the most fulfilling parts of their lives. This work is so meaningful to all of us who are part of ShelterBox. And if you have a little itch inside, like, you know what, I think I want to learn more. I think I might be able to serve. I could put that tent up. It's not so easy. But there's so many ways, and I always say, everyone has something to contribute and a way that you can participate, big or small. It all makes a difference. And it's the additive effect of the cumulative efforts of all of you that make this work possible. So a big thank you to our team, to all of you. I unfortunately have to leave after this presentation today, but I'm putting my email up there. Please reach out to me, reach out to your ambassadors. If there's any way that you want to be involved, you want to help, that's how this happens. So just a big thank you for having me. From the bottom of my heart, I love this district. No one likes it when I say it online and Facebook, but it's my favorite district. You know, everyone else gets it. It is, I love it. So I hope I can see you again, and just thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for the Rotary Youth Exchange. That was so, so powerful last night. They raised over $8,000, and I think that number has been climbing because of many of you. I had the opportunity to meet several of these folks, including the extraordinary Youth Exchange student who made these pins, these sunflower pins. She made hundreds of these pins, and she raised over $1,000 selling these pins. So truly inspiring. So thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you. An amazing presentation. I'm sitting back there and I'm just like, wow. Thank you for all that ShelterBox is doing. In thankfulness for being here today and for all you're doing for ShelterBox and for our global community, we have this beautiful serving platter. And this was made by Rotarians of the Greater Clark County, Vancouver, Washington area. And there's this beautiful insignia here for you. So thank you very much. We so appreciate you. Keep doing the great work. All right. And there's also another important notice here. So last night, after the wonderful Youth Exchange presentation, you were all asked to empty your pockets. Remember those bags that were on the table? Well, Kerri, to add to the total from last night, which I think was $8,000 and something, $1,800 was raised just by emptying our pockets. So great job, Rotarian. Thank you for showing up, and thank you for supporting ShelterBox. And our wonderful Laura Helmer is out.